Why should we bother studying the philosophy of nature? Because as men, we are made in the image of God, and God wants to understand the world, to understand man, and to understand himself. That's the reason of our being here. And women uh, want to be understood. It's very troubling for a woman when a man can read her mind. And we all have a part of femininity and masculinity within us. And there's a strange phenomena that women tend to be attracted magnetically by spiritual teachers who lack charisma, because they, on a deep level, they understand that true charisma is not necessarily power or wealth, or being a jerk, but spiritual understanding. And women are sometimes even themselves surprised to be attracted unconsciously by spiritual leaders that they don't really find that attractive, but they are nonetheless attracted to them. And philosophy is inverted sexuality. And this is Evola who explains that. I talked about it in my video about the metaphysics of sex. So man, through his cognitive work, wants to penetrate intellectually nature. And this is simply in the realm of intelligence what most people do in the realm of basic instincts. So yeah. And my view is Hegelian. And for modern science, alchemy is just nonsense, a delirium in the mind of the alchemist. But from the point of view of Hegel, Darwinism and cosmological evolution is a delirium in the mind of God. It is rational, because in Hegel's view there is rationality even in madness. And so from a Hegelian perspective, Darwinism is an alchemical process, because Darwin explains to us how from the most basic organism, by a process of negation of the environment, of chemical transmutation, of self-negation, to adapt to the environment, to be eliminated, to transform, to grow and carry within you the past moments of your evolution, because we all carry within us the entire history of life, of our primitive ancestors, and the end of this evolution, which for the transhumanist and the eugenicist, man is only a transitory being which must be transcended. And this also is, transhumanism and eugenics are alchemical ideas in the realm of the understanding. But the true purpose of man is to transcend himself, to turn the lead into gold. And the Darwinian history of life is an alchemical narrative. And the future envisioned by the eugenicists like Richard Lynn, or the eugenicists like Lothrop Stoddard in the last century, were projection in the future of an alchemical will to transform a man as an intermediary being into a higher being. And this is the purpose of alchemy. And I will read you a few quotes that for the alchemists and the Neoplatonic and the Hermeticists, the world is an emanation of the One, the Mysterium Magnum, the great mystery, produced via the force of separation. So when I had my God experience in 2018, I imagined myself having separated myself from myself, which was an evil act, but which created at the same time love, which is the will to be reunited with oneself. And the whole movement of existence consists in intellectually reuniting what has been separated. And they say that man is the quinta essentia, the fifth essence, the fifth element, because he possesses reason. And that man must redeem God and bring the world to perfection through cognitive knowledge. And this is what all scientific consciousnesses are unconsciously doing. They are trying to bring, they don't know it, but to bring the world to perfection, not by producing technology which improves the quality of life, it's only a byproduct, but by producing intelligence and understanding, which is what really what God really wants, is to understand man, nature, and himself. And yeah, and so my view is that Darwinism and cosmological evolution are alchemical ideas gone wrong in a way, but the wrong is part of the path towards intellectual righteousness in the view of Hegel. So uh, the alchemical process transforms the individual from an ordinary mortal immersed in the physical world to a superior being fully conscious of the mystery of life and death. The philosopher's stone was held to represent the hen kai pan and the quest for the stone, the knowledge of all things, or of God. And that the alchemist possessed the secret of freeing spirit from matter. The purpose of intellectual activity is to spiritualize nature. This is what what Schelling says in the system of transcendental idealism, is that that's what physicists, modern empirical atheist materialist physicists do, is that they eliminate the material part of nature and they transform it into laws and universals and ideas. Is that materialism negates itself, because from a cosmological Darwinian perspective, the physical universe produced life, life produced man, man produced science in the empirical sense, and science produced a knowledge of the world which tells us that at the basic quantum level, matter is not even physical, it's vibrating, it's potential, a potentiality, a self negating process. It's everything is made of void and vibrating particles. It's not really even solid anymore. And this is in the cosmological Darwinian perspective, the self-negation of nature, the spiritualization of nature. But from a Hegelian perspective, the idea comes first, is that nature is the fallenness or the alienation of the eternal logical idea, and through logic and through conceptual understanding, one must elevate oneself above nature, and this is the entire work of spirit. And yeah, so I go back to the book about a compendium of modern physics. He says that the first civilization had no scientific knowledge as we understand it, and the old Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Babylonian, Egyptian knowledge was lacking understanding. That's why it's obscure, because the modern mind doesn't understand what is not understandable through the understanding. But there is a tendency among occultists, so-called spiritualist groups to resort back to this primitive, some sort of knowledge, the idea that in a mythical past, man possessed the totality of knowledge. And that's the distinction between Vernunft without understanding and understanding without Vernunft, and spirit is the unity of both. And the fall from this so-called primitive knowledge had to occur so that the fullness of being that people fantasize the old civilizations had can be reestablished, but in full consciousness with understanding in the Verständigkeit. And yeah, then he talks about the Greek miracle. The Greek were the first theorists of nature. They tried to think abstractly about nature to grasp the principle of all things, and this is the beginning of philosophy. And he says that the ancient Greek philosophers were mathematicians, physicists, philosophers, legislators. Sometimes they were complete beings. They had not yet been separated into the division of labor, which makes that today a philosopher only knows about philosophy and only the minimum about other sciences. A physicist only knows about physics, and he lacks a full understanding of the whole of reality. There are exceptions, but knowledge is compartmentalized. I'm not sure it's an understandable word, that it's fragmented. Each knower is a specialist in his own field, but there is no global, all-encompassing wisdom. Then he talks about the Romans, who received and incorporated Greek knowledge, but they lacked the creative theoretical spark. So the Romans were military conquerors and legislators and architects, but they were not speculative thinkers. And then there was the Middle Ages in Europe, and knowledge passed on to the Arabs. And the Chinese were a practical people. They had made great useful inventions, but they had not the theoretical understanding of physics. So they were very inventive, but not theoretically minded enough. And and then there was the Renaissance, and the Renaissance was a kind of a revival of ancestral knowledge, pagan knowledge, a cosmic knowledge, the idea of the unity of man, the cosmos, and God. It was a flooring of ideas, an outburst of some crazy ideas, but some very profound ideas as well. It was a Dionysian moment, and this Dionysian exuberance produced in the 17th century its opposite, which was the classical age of not enlightenment, it was the 18th century, but an enlightening rationalism. So we went from an outburst of the life of thought in the Renaissance, and the 17th century was more clarity, a conceptual order, and in the 18th century it was a complete rejection of God and of all things spiritual, and it was dead rationalism. And then at the turn of the 18th and early 19th century, we had German idealism, which incorporated both aspects, and Hegel tried to reconcile the intuitive feeling of the unity of all things with the understanding in the modern scientific sense. And that it is said in the book about Hegel and Hermeticism that Hegel's philosophy of nature is the most grandiose, the most astonishing attempt to reconcile science as we modern understand it with pseudoscience, alchemy, occultism, spiritual influences, correspondences, and stuff like that. And that's why many people do not understand Hegel's philosophy of nature. It's because he's so far removed from the ordinary consciousness of physical sciences that we have. But I'm trying to resurrect this kind of experience of the divine within nature. And the book about Hegel and Hermeticism says that Hegel's purpose is to make us aware of the numinous, the supernatural within nature, to reconcile man with the beauty of nature. And that's a very difficult task, but